church music for it. Glad you're here. Thank you for coming. A couple of reminders. See there's a crowd gathered back there signing the roll. If you haven't signed the roll, be sure that you do before you leave. So very important. A couple of other things to remind you about. If you are, we encourage you to be a part of Alleluia this summer. That seems like a long time away, and yet July is not as far away as it used to be. So I encourage you to be a part of Alleluia this summer. I sent you an email a few weeks ago. I will send you another email. This email will have a link for you to fill out a form, which would be great for us to have, so you can actually go and fill out a form. But why should you come to Alleluia? It's free for you. You get to interact with clinicians, you get to go to sessions, you get to see the background of how the conference works, you get to be a part of the whole background thing, which is a lot of what we do in music ministry, is plan events and make things happen. So it's a really valuable experience, and we want you to be a part of it. Also, this year, I and we will be leading worship for Alleluia, and I will also be sending you an email in the next few days asking you to meet as a part of the planning team to put together those services. So be expecting that, and we'll probably do that sometime on Dia de Losa, which is not the greatest time, but there are no conflicts on Dia de Losa that are insurmountable. So anyway, we'll probably be sending you something like that in a few days. The only other time that we meet this semester is the Northcutt lecture, which is about
April 1st.
Yeah, 2 weeks away. So April 1st is Northcutt lecture with Carl Shaw, and that meeting is this year in Armstrong Browning. So we're moving that from the McCrary building to Armstrong Browning. So we'll enjoy being in that space. Okay, I want to introduce you today to Dr. Diane Greene. Dr. Greene is Executive Director of Worship at First Presbyterian Church in Houston, and there she's in charge of worship, music, and fine arts. She is from Four Oaks, North Carolina, and she grew up as a Baptist. So her Presbyterian thing was a conversion of some sort at a later time in her life, and we'll let maybe her talk about that. She has she has a Bachelor of Arts in Music and Psychology from Campbell University in Buies Creek, North Carolina. She also has a Master of Divinity and a Master of Church Music and a Doctor of Ministry degree from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest. And she's done other postdoctoral work at Regents Park College in Oxford. She's a mother of 2 children, 2 sons, and we are very, very glad to have you here today. Thank you for coming, and thank you for sharing with us. Diane Greene.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm going to give you a pop quiz really quickly. All right. So Gungor is a new designer for young professionals. True or false? Oh, yeah. You know Gungor? Good. Mundharmonica is a mouth organ. True or false? True. Lyrics for Celebrate Life are written by Reagan Courtney. True or false?
True.
True. Celebrate Life.
True.
Robert Shaw is a linebacker for the Chicago Bears. Fascinating Rhythm is a tune composed by John Gershwin and comprised of durational rhythms of South Indian music. True or false?
True.
Oh. Why?
John Gershwin.
Because not John Gershwin. George Gershwin. Oh, good. Cindy Cruz Radcliffe is the only female worship leader on the Lakewood team. True or false? So true. All right. Mozarabic chant was the liturgical chant of the Christian Church of Rome until its suppression in favor of the Roman Rite in 1085. True or false? Why is it false? Mozarabic chant was the liturgical chant of the Christian Church of Spain, not Rome. Fake Book is a collection of popular and jazz melodies with chord symbols. True or false?
True.
Oh yeah, looking at Fake Book. Snake is a connection used to power an electronic sound system. True or false?
True.
So true, it is true.
That is.
Wow.
Talk back is a term, isn't it? Snake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Power's that big, long thing. I'm not an electronic. I haven't meeting things. Talk, last one. Talk back is a term used by organists to make clear their point of view. True or false?
In such a way.
So true. No, talk back is what's used in a contemporary band, right? To share it with by the band leader. Well, good. Well, you did fairly well on that little quiz. I'll give you another one in a few minutes. I'm delighted to be here on this St. Patrick's Day. I see some of you have on a little bit of green, but
We have a real green here.
I carry the name. At any rate, a passion for proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ to the field of worship arts in this new and innovative century, in a church where the worship of God is the central focus, where team spirit is considered essential, where building foundational structure in the lives of congregants is emphasized, where there is a zeal for prayer, and where the ultimate goal is mission. Some years ago, I was born and bred a Baptist, and I'm still a Baptist. We have a Methodist. We have a choral director, John Yarrington. Some of you may know him. He is Methodist, serving in a Presbyterian church, and he's the choral master at HBU, at Baptist College University. So we just stick to whatever we are and move right along. Some convert to Presbyterian and some don't. But at any rate, some years ago, about maybe 7, 8 years ago, I began to think, you know what, I've done so many things across the church, or in the church, and I would like to really begin to focus on looking at the more global aspect of church. What does church look like across the country? I'm an old traditionalist, so I come from an organ. Organ is my instrument. I was choir master for many years in different churches, and so I have a very, I came from that very, very strong traditional background. But I realized that in this 21st century, you all are smart, you're innovative, you're savvy, you know a lot about technology, and there's no way I can catch up. But I know that as an old person, I have to have one foot in your camp. But as an old person, I also have to keep one foot in my camp, in that old traditional camp. And so at some point, I just decided, you know what, I can't stand over here. I've got to figure out, and I've got to look at churches across the country and see what's going on. And so I began to pray about it. And literally, I sat down one day, and these words just flowed out of me onto a piece of paper. I'm going to read them again. A passion for proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ to the field of worship arts in this new and innovative century. In a church where the worship of God is the central focus, where team spirit is considered essential, where building foundational structure in the lives of congregants is emphasized, where there is a zeal for prayer, and where the ultimate goal is mission. That being said, I just opened myself up to a search, and it wasn't very long after that I was between St. John the Divine in New York City and First Presbyterian in Houston. There is a world of difference between those two. I knew I was going to St. John because New York, that's just my world, that's my territory. And I thought, you know, I'll learn about all this stuff, Lord, I'll learn about all of it, but I'll learn it up there. Well, I didn't get that position. And even as I was wrestling with, do I really want to go to Texas? The good old boy state? Really? As a woman in ministry, do I really want to go to Texas? As a Baptist woman in ministry, do I really want to go to Texas and be in a Presbyterian church? You know, the more I wrestled with that, the more God just spoke to me and pushed me and pushed me and pushed me. And when I got to First Presbyterian, it probably took me 2 years to realize that everything in this statement is at First Presbyterian Houston. This is a statement. This could be their mission statement. It could definitely be. Everything here is there. And in the midst of all that, I got to go across the country and do some self-directed studies in churches from the tip of New York all the way down the coast and in the middle, and then all the way to LA and California. And it's really been interesting. So at First Presbyterian, I lead a worship team that is made up of, now this is not the worship staff, this is a worship team. It's made up of a couple of people from our staff, John Yarrington, who is at HBU, he's the choral director there, and head of, actually this year, he's still head of the choral department. I think next year that position is changing. Rhonda Furr, who is professor of sacred music at HBU. Both of those were at First Pres when I got there. Carrie Lels, whom I have actually raised in church music, and she's our contemporary worship director at this point. John is our choral director, Rhonda's our organist. And then as well on that team are 7 pastors. They're all men, but that's okay, because they just embrace me as part of the team. And so it's really been an amazing experience to work in that kind of environment. That worship team, we meet as a planning, you know, and we meet together once a month to plan long-term worship. And the pastors will tell us what they're going to preach on. We have team preaching. Do you know what team preaching is? So it's almost like a relay preaching.
We alternate preachers from week to week.
Alternate preachers from week to week, and nobody knows who's going to be preaching except us. We don't publish it. But every preacher, every pastor on the team preaches. And not all senior pastors will allow that, but it's pretty amazing. So we meet and we plan together in the worship, and then I meet with all of the people that are involved in worship once a week as well. I have vision and oversight over 7 full and part-time members of the worship and music staff, and then paid and volunteer music leaders in various programs. A $200,000 operations budget, a $500,000 personnel budget, 37 paid choral singers and instrumentalists employed weekly, oversight for the mobilization of about 250 volunteers weekly, oversight of all worship, music, and fine arts programs and events at First Presbyterian, and I provide leadership and training for the pastors, the worship team, volunteers in all aspects of worship. I went to First Presbyterian as the director of worship, music, and fine arts, and in 2009, I went there in 2008, and 2009, was promoted to the executive director of worship, music, and fine arts. The only thing that changes is it just adds more work to my plate. So, you know, a title is just a title. It's kind of what you do with it. But the real joy of that title brought with it the opportunity to be part of the leadership team, or an executive leadership team. And at that point, there were only 4 of us. Now there's 6 of us. And I actually like 6 better than I did 4. But to be part of that team that really sits together, prays together, visions together, and plans together. I love visioning. That's really excites me. Most of you know Houston. Everybody in here probably knows Houston better than I do. Houston's the 4th largest city in the nation, with 2 miles of medical and research facilities and a museum district, and second only to New York City, with a number of nationally recognized theaters and professional arts organizations. First Presbyterian is located right in the heart of Houston, right in the heart of all of that. The museum district is just to the side, and the medical mecca is 2 miles of it, just in front of and down the road from First Presbyterian. The heart of the city is just a mile down the other way. So we're really located in a place where the arts are just, and research is really exceptional. We have 4 worship services on Sunday morning. We had 6. We had 2 services that were other language services, but we no longer have those. At this point, we have 4 morning services. One is a sort of a jazz gospel service. There are 2 traditional services and then a full-out contemporary service. In those services, we always have proclamation of the word, praise, prayer, confession, and response. That's part of the planning, intentional planning to have in each of those services. Now, how they're put in those services is different. In the traditional service, we have the big organ, the mighty organ, and the choir processes. The choir didn't process one Sunday morning about a year and a half ago. And John Yerington got a note that week from one of the church members that said, Dr. Yerington, you ruined my worship. I couldn't worship the rest of the day. I couldn't, in the morning, I couldn't concentrate because you didn't have the processional. The processional is very important to me. I'm not going to say what John said, but at any rate, he has a great sense of humor. But he was like, they really need that processional. Some of the older members, especially for whom that is really a part of their ritual of service. There's about 4,000 members. We've shaved down a little bit because we've really purged our roles, and I say that loosely, but in a time where we're going through a discernment period, we wanted to be sure that we knew how many members we actually had and who was members, and that they knew that whether they had joined the church or not. Because in a place like First Pres, you can go there for 20 years and never join, and you think you did, but you didn't. You've been there so long, you just feel like a member. At this church, there are 2 gyms. One for children, one for everything else. There's a Fit for Life Center. Turn a key in the larger gym, and 1,000 chairs begin to emerge. About 3 hours later, it's a state-of-the-art worship space. Full multimedia team, full lighting, all of it. And that's where we have our contemporary service. And a number of other productions that we do in that space. Our sanctuary is very white marble and very traditional, very beautiful. So while I have been at First Pres, I'm trying to tell you as much about the church as I can and a little bit about me, and then I'm going to shift over and give you some practical applications that hopefully will be helpful. So while I've been there, here's what I've done. There's 4 areas of growth that I've really that's really been significant for me. Service, administration, management, and worship styles. And I couldn't have just, I couldn't have looked at God in the face and said, hey, this is what I need, and this is what I really like to begin to learn. I have a great thirst for knowledge and for education, and I want to learn everything, but this is really what I need to learn. I couldn't have picked it out better. See, he picked it out for me. I knew exactly what I needed to learn, and knew exactly who to surround me with in order for me to grow in those areas. What I've had the opportunity to give back is this: I've built ministry teams, I've aligned committees to vision, I've defined and restored the 4 English-speaking worship services to their natural order, and with a flow and leadership that's stylistically and liturgically appropriate. When I first went to First Presbyterian, Dave McKechnie was the interim senior pastor there. I don't know if you know Dave McKechnie, do you? If you've ever had a fundraiser, you know Dave McKechnie. He can raise $1 million in 15 minutes and with just one speech. So, yeah, don't be near him if you don't want to be fleeced. But, he's a great guy, but he really does he can raise some serious money. He was the senior pastor for 25, 27 years at Grace Presbyterian, and so then he retired and went to First Pres to be their interim pastor, and now he's at Bel Air Presbyterian in LA. And he actually sat down with me and said, what I want to see in the traditional services is warmth. I just want to see warmth between the last maybe 2 pastors back and where First Pres was at that point. They had a couple of people in the position that I'm holding now that really had tried really hard to move it very much toward a very stark liturgical high church service, and that's really not the DNA of the church. It really isn't. They do like high church elements, and they do like liturgical elements, but for the most part, it's an evangelical church. It just is. That doesn't mean that that they get down on their knees and pray, because they don't. It doesn't mean that they clap at the 9:30 service, because they don't. But but it does mean that that they have an evangelical slant, and that they do like hymns like Blessed Assurance and I Surrender All. What most Presbyterians would call Baptist Sunday school hymns. We don't call it that. So I've staffed and provided visionary leadership for a full contemporary worship team. And remember, going into this church, I didn't know much about contemporary worship, right? This is yes, because that's what I said earlier on. This is no. There are no no's. So I had to learn from the ground floor. You know where I went? I went to Gateway. Where's a better place to go? Gateway. There are many other places to go. I just got back from Hillsong not too long ago, back in October. But I went to Gateway, and I sat down with those guys, and I said, what is it that you got here that makes people want to be on your stage? And they said, we don't have a stage, lady. We have a platform. If you want to be a minister here, if you want to worship here, if you want to be a worship leader, you want to pick up your guitar and play, you got to intern in that pew for a year. We got to see your heart. We got to know that you've got something more to offer us than great talent. And that was the very first time that I had ever experienced the real heart of contemporary worship. Of it being something besides just, okay, let's just get up and we'll play the guitars and we're going to sing songs that are our age and are different, just because that's what we want to do. Gateway, the guys at Gateway taught me, they really taught me a lot. They taught me a lot about what value meant. Now, I've always, the idea of a value system has always been important to me, but what to value in a person that is going to be leading your worship. And we're leaders, as I'm a leader, and I'm out there hiring people or selecting people or raising up volunteers to do this, that became really the top category was, the top things is the value system of both the person that I'm bringing in and of what we value at our church. The other thing that has been really important to me is this development of what I feel like is a fairly unique and collaborative roundtable worship planning program with the First Presbyterian pastors and worship leaders. And it really does, it works, and it's amazing. And we are very much roundtable. I'll talk to you about that a little more in a little more depth in a minute. And I conceived and implemented a program called Broadway at First. And that's a fine arts component of ministry using Broadway shows to teach confidence and musicality and movement and social issues from a biblical perspective to children and youth. You think, okay, Broadway in the church. What you talking about? Values. But as a young musician coming up in ministry, I couldn't find very good music for children and youth in the early years. Now there's some great music written, but there was a lot of just little ditties written for children and youth too. And I found some incredible musicianship and ways to use Broadway music and Broadway text that would that I could teach social issues, biblical issues, social issues with a biblical foundation. And so we've been able to put that in place. There's a huge mission component in that, where we bring in homeless children, and there are a lot of homeless children in Houston, and allow them to have the opportunity that they might never have, and that is to work with equity directors and to work with live orchestra. And then it gives our First Presbyterian children, who, you know, I say this tongue in cheek, but most of them come from wealthy families, and so they're not used to homeless children. And so it gives them a chance to cohabitate for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks together as they begin to collaborate and work together with each other and form a team that by the end, they're all just wanting to do a great job. You know, it's not about the they and the us or the we and the them. It's about, let's just all do a great job, and let's show Christ to each other. So faith is the essential element for lasting foundation. I totally believe that. I also believe that vision and excellence layered upon a foundation of faith are the basic components required to build a solid program in the church. And I think that is incredibly important, is that we have, we not only have a base of faith, but that we are willing to go the extra mile to make it excellent. Okay, so there's no time in history that's more exciting to be in Christian ministry than today. The church today is about embracing diversity of language, race, denomination, etc. The church that seemed so stable in my growing up years is now exploring, ever-changing and evolving into what? It's a rhetorical question. Who knows? Who knows what it's evolving into? It's evolving so fast. The church is evolving as quickly, I think, as the world is, as technology is. So what do we know? We know traditional's not going away, right? We know contemporary's here to stay, right? You know, when I was, back in the 60s, we had contemporary music too, right? It was just a little different than yours. But the concept was the same, right? We were exploring our own music. Well, you're exploring yours. And hopefully, we're all exploring it together. I found that, do you know Indelible Grace? You do RUF, the Reformed University. You have that here, fellowship. It came out of Belmont University in Nashville. It started in the leadership of a campus minister named Kevin Twitt. I follow him on Facebook and Twitter, and would love to get to know him. Our college pastor knows him, but I haven't had a chance to meet him yet. But I really want to sit down with him and just talk to him just about the weather and how this vision came into play for him, and what makes it important for the words to be heady. What makes this work across the country, and why do college students, why are they drawn to it? And so a question for you. Jazz worship has, in the last few years, has really kind of, I think, taken on a new energy. There's a revival of contemplative worship. I think that is a rebellion against pop culture, but maybe not. Certainly contemplative worship is not new. They were doing that way, way, way back then. So we're pulling and we're drawing from old. Same thing with RUF. You take Rock of Ages and you change the words, but you still got Rock of Ages there. You just got it in a much more in-depth language. And then I think of significance is Churches Without Walls. You know this? The Tim Keller sort of model, apostles kind of model, city church, center church, where you've got this nucleus, this mother church here. But the mother church is not really, it's not like a building with white marble in it like our building. You know, it could be a house in the middle of New York City. And all of these pockets of churches began to be planted around the city. And they're small groups. It may just be a high-rise apartment building. And in those little churches that are being planted, they all actually kind of have an arm or a link back to the mother church, right? Yes. So if the theology and the philosophy of that mother church is reformed and conservative, then that is going to feed in to those pockets. There'll be individuality in those churches, but for the most part, they're going to follow that nucleus or that mother church. A long time ago, it's kind of like Amway. You know Amway? I think that concept is sort of like Amway. Okay, the timeline. A long time ago, 50 years ago, it was hard to get people to write a check. Why? Because they didn't have any money. And then about 25 years ago, it was hard to get people to give their time. Why? Because they were working really, really hard and building careers. That was a real big, let's get the career and the family, and let's just, we've got all of our time is covered. Today, it's easy to get people to write a check, right? It is, really, whether you know it or not. And it's easy to get people to give their time. If there's passion and there's vision, people will follow, and they'll give their time. And if it connects to them, and they'll give lots of time. It's important to them. But what's hard today? What?
Energy.
Energy, yeah, that's a great answer. And it really does follow in. It's hard to get people's attention today. Why? Yeah, there's so many distractions. There's so much stuff going on. There's so much things you want to do. It's hard to get people's attention. And what do we do with that? Who knows? There are five. I want to share 5 practical applications or strengths from the experiences that I've had that hopefully you can take and use those to look within your own self and see how you can grow. Before I do that, I'm going to give you a couple of John Yerington's bloopers. Do you know John Yerington? Oh dear. Well, he wrote a couple of books. One is Choir Crack-Ups, and the other is Who Stole My Hymnal, and and he's got a great sense of humor. Tough, but he's got a great sense of humor. At the evening service tonight, the sermon topic will be, what is hell? Come early and listen to our choir rehearsal. It's bulletin bloopers. Yeah. The pastor will preach his farewell message, after which the choir will sing, Break Forth into Joy. I'm not sure we should be laughing at those. 8 new choir robes are currently needed due to the addition of several new members and the deterioration of some older ones. He's a nut. Okay, 5 practical strengths or applications. Know what you believe and what you value. Do you have a philosophy of worship? How many worship leaders in here? Stand up. Stand up. For any, yeah, look at there. That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, sit back down. For any one of you, could I point and say, what is your philosophy of worship? What is your philosophy of worship? And could you answer that quickly? Know what you value. And if you don't have a philosophy of worship, I'll give you one. Kierkegaard, you know Kierkegaard's philosophy of worship? Say yes.
Yes.
Good. For those of you who don't know Kierkegaard's philosophy of worship, it's a drama played out. It's worship in terms of a drama. So worship is prompted by the leaders, which would be what? The ministers, the pastors. It's played out by the actors, which would be what?
Congregation.
The worshipers, exactly. And it's listened to by the audience, which is God. That's it. So you can use Kierkegaard's if you don't have one, until you determine what yours is. Style of worship. What style of worship? Are you all over the place? Or have you really nailed down something that feels right for you to be able to be authentic and to be humble and to really step forward and say, I'm going to lead you to the throne of grace? Because that's a pretty awesome okay. Is your worship vertical or horizontal? What about your architect of worship? How long do you spend in planning? Good. Worship leaders. You're a worship leader? You stood up? How long do you spend planning for a worship service?
About an hour, arranging here.
Okay, good. How about you? You worship?
Probably about an hour.
Okay.
Well,
Good.
I'm the accompanist at his church, but I've been a worship leader before, and honestly it's not as long as that because I'm Catholic, so it's
It's a liturgy.
Yeah,
It's put together, and the prayers are put together. Yeah. And I'm not executing them all, I'm crafting them. So what goes into the architecture of worship? Do you have a call to worship? You remember a while ago I said there are 5 elements: proclamation, praise, prayer, confidence, and response. I'm looking intentionally for those when I'm looking at whatever elements I'm going to put in the worship service. And I can shift those around. They don't all have to be at the same place. But at any rate, knowing and spending time with the scripture, and spending time with the text, and spending time in prayer, all of those are vastly important aspects of what I value. Know what you believe and what you value. Are you conservative or liberal? Are you moderately conservative or moderately liberal? Are you lukewarm? Have you not decided what you are yet? All right, secondly, understand and accept the culture and the DNA of the church you're serving. The church we serve doesn't belong to us. How many serve in a church right now? All of those who stood up? Good, good. The church we serve does not belong to us. We're given the privilege to weave our brand of magic or artistry or expertise or gifts into the historical aspect or the historical tapestry of whatever church we have been given the privilege to serve. What's our responsibility is to align ourselves with the values that church has adopted. Years ago, I served Madison Avenue Baptist Church down in eastern North Carolina, Goldsboro. And it is a rural community. And I was working on my dissertation, working on my doctorate, and I entitled it "Toward an Increasing Awareness of Music as an Avenue for Worship at Madison Avenue Baptist Church." And I was young and I thought I knew everything. And I really thought that I was going to teach these people in this church how to worship. I did. I thought, I got it. I know, I understand, I'm educated. So I'm going to teach them how to worship. Now, I'm going to do it in 2 ways. I'm going to do it through Bach's Clavier Boom, and I'm going to do it through Vivaldi's Gloria. So, organ and choral. The choral's going to be in Latin, and the organ's going to be, it might as well be in Greek. Through the organ work, through Bach's Clavier Boom, if you don't know that, it's really a play on the Lutheran Catechism. So the things that I was going to be able to teach them was about the Trinity and commandments, about creeds and prayer and baptism and confession and communion. Through the Gloria, I was going to teach them praise and hope and adoration and supplication and affirmation. And I spent a year with those folks. I was there for 13 years, but I spent a year working on this dissertation with those folks. I did lectures on Wednesday nights, and you know, they came. They loved me. They came. They listened while I droned on and on and on and on about the Lutheran Catechism. And the choir spent months working on the Latin for Vivaldi Gloria. And when it was all over, I gave this big survey out. And I mean, pages and pages of survey. And people really answered the question. I failed miserably. I didn't succeed at all. I didn't teach them a thing about worship. Taught them a little bit about theology. I taught them a little bit about stuff that, you know, that if you've got an ascending scale in Bach's Clavier Boom, you know you're just rising right on up to heaven. And so once in a while they might have caught that. But I didn't change their culture. I didn't change their DNA, and I didn't teach them how to worship. They already knew how to worship. They'd lost sons and daughters. They'd lost farms. They had, you know, some of them had lived through the Depression. These folks, they already understood about worship. They knew how to pray. But what they taught me was about love and about power. they loved me so much that for a year of their lives, they came to all of those little mini recitals and all of those word lectures and all of that. They came and they supported me because they loved me. And when it was all over, they still loved me. One choir member said, "You know, Diana, I'm so glad this is over. I'm so glad I don't ever want to do Latin again." So, but they loved me through it, and they walked me through it, and they supported me through it. And they helped me to also understand that I had a great deal of power over that congregation. I could say, "Turn to the right," and they would turn because they trusted me. They loved me and they trusted me. And I learned at that point that I've taken a year of your life thinking that I was really heading down the right direction to teach you something, to get you to learn how to worship. And I didn't do that at all. I used that time most improperly, because I could have taught them all about that in 2 weeks, and they could have gone right on and about their lives. We have a great deal of power. We're given a great deal of power. And we stand up in front of a congregation and we pick up whatever instrument we hold, whether it's a baton, a guitar, a drum, it doesn't matter. We stand there in the power of Jesus Christ, saying, "Come, come, come to the very throne of Christ." We step off of that platform and we say, "What?" I don't know, let you fill that in. We need to use that power in the right way, and we really need to know that we have that, because when it's abused, it really is bad. Okay, so know your senior pastor. And as a tagline, know all of those other pastors too. A senior pastor is typically ordained, right? Ordained by God, ordained by man. The church has called that senior pastor, and typically that senior pastor has a vision, right? A vision for the church. And usually it's kind of on the line of where the church is, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it usually is. We need to know our senior pastors, and we need to be able to line up behind them and support them, and not work against them, but support them and help carry them as they go. There are times that we can say, for instance, I have a senior pastor who really didn't know about the specifics of the liturgical year. So Christ the King Sunday was like, oh, what is that? And because he came from a very contemporary background, he didn't come to Christ until he was about 30. So he didn't grow up in all of that same kind of stuff that I had grown up in with stuff like Christ the King Sunday. And I can easily take a printout from Google to him about Christ the King Sunday, and he loves that. He'll take it, he'll read it, he'll figure it out. Sometimes he'll mention it on Sunday morning if we on the particular Sundays that those apply for. What he is not interested in is being lectured to or made to feel like he doesn't know anything. And oftentimes, as musicians, we feel empowered. That again, we know everything. I'm an organist, so I can really tell you from an organist background, we do feel like, oh, it's got to be this way and this way only. I'm not there any longer, but I have been in those early years. Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church had a great pastor named Brian Kirkland. You know this church, Fifth Avenue Presbyterian in New York City? Oh, it was a great church, and it had a gentle giant of a pastor who'd been there for about 27 years. I knew him in my early years. I was probably about 35, somewhere in there. And he took a great interest in my husband and I guess he saw something that he felt he could speak into. And so he spent right much time in our home. And he was telling a story one night. We were talking about organists and pastors and staff and pastors. And I'm not picking on organists. I'm just telling you I know the stories because that's what that was my instrument. But anyway, he said, for 11 years, did you know William Whitehead? Are there any organists in here? Oh, look at there. You know William Whitehead? Do you remember that name?
Yeah.
He's passed away since then. But so William Whitehead was probably one of the finest organists in the country. Everybody, when I was 30, knew William Whitehead. Hot-headed, fabulous organist. And so he'd been at Fifth Avenue Presbyterian for many years. For 11, well, he was there for 11 years. For 11 years, Brian Kirkland met with him on Monday morning, every Monday morning. And every Monday morning, Brian Kirkland would say, I would really like to do this hymn. And William Whitehead would, about 3 of those Mondays a month, would go into spasms. He was so angry. He was like, we're not doing that. I am not playing that hymn. If I have to play that hymn, I'm going to another church down the road. I'm going to that church down there. I'm not playing that hymn. We could not have that hymn in our worship service. And they really did have this kind of banter between each other. I mean, Kirkland didn't banter, but he sort of put up with that for a number of years. And one morning, I mean, I can see him still sitting in that rocking chair. He's a big giant of a man, just quiet and gentle. I still see him sitting in my living room in the rocking chair. And he said, and I wrote the quote down. I'm going to read it to you. He said, William, I'm sure that one of those churches that need your brand of hymnody will be very happy to have you serving them, because we no longer require your services. And that was the end. That was it. That was it. The book was closed, and he was done. 11 years is a long time. My senior pastor wouldn't put up with that. Jim Birchfield wouldn't put up with that. Dave McKechnie wouldn't put up with that. Now, all of them, all the pastors that I work with, I come in and say, you know what, I know you want to do this one, but have you thought about this? Because, look, this hymn, look at the words on this hymn. And to every time I've ever done it, it's like, oh, let's do that. There are often times that I walk in and say, hey, I have this idea and I really think it would be awesome. And before I can get the idea out, it's like, do it. It's amazing. But if I walked in and it just doesn't happen the other way. Know your senior pastor. Know all your pastors. Because ultimately, your senior pastor, that's the shoulders that they carry. All of it. They do. Whatever mess-ups and screw-ups you do, I do, we do, they either have to sweep the floor and get things cleaned up from all those messes, and they have to bear the weight of whatever goes on with their staff. Know them and support them. And finally, understand the definition of collaboration. I think for me this is so important. Oftentimes we just feel like, man, we know it. I'm still going back to that first story. We know it. We just know it. But working and collaborating with other groups groups and other people, you can have so much better program than you can just doing it by yourself. I promise you. Harvard says top-down doesn't work anymore. Round table. I come from a farm, so on the farm when we plant a row, one person digs the hole, one person puts the seeds in, one person comes back along and pushes the dirt back over the seeds, and another person comes along and waters. It's a group effort. If you can get around a table, kind of like that we're talking about Center Church, if you can get around the table and the nucleus is Jesus Christ, and what is going to come to that center is going to be the best of all ideas. And if you're not so arrogant, if we're not so arrogant that we can't sit at a table with someone who's smarter than we are, only when you can sit at a table with someone who's smarter than you are, and you know they're smarter than you are, and you can let them play top to their gifts, only then can you have the best program. Only then can you be the best that you can be, because everybody's gifts are coming to the table. You can duke it out and come to the best conclusion. It might not be your idea, but as a team, you got buy-in, and you've got bright minds all working together. I don't think anything surpasses that. And that's what we have around those team meetings when we have that worship planning. I want to tell you a little story quickly. Little boy was at home, and a little boy was downtown, and some men had come to the town, and they were posting up signs, and the sign said, "Circus is coming to town." And it had Saturday written big, in big print on it. The little boy ran home to his mom and his dad, and he said, "Pa, Ma, can I go? Can I go to the circus? The circus is coming to town. It's going to be there. It's going to be in town." And his pa, the farm guy, said, "Well, son, I reckon you can if all your chores are done." And so the little boy worked really hard that week. And on Saturday morning, he presented himself to his ma and his pa. And he's all got his hair fixed, and he's got his good clothes on, and he's ready to go to the circus. And he said, "All my chores are done, everything's ready, can I go, can I go?" And his pa and mom said, "Yes, yes you can." His pa put his hand on the little boy's shoulder and reached way down in his pocket, and he pulled out a crumpled dollar bill and he handed it to the little boy. And he said, "Son, you go to the circus and you have a really good time." The little boy, lickety-split down the path, went to town. When he got to town, the parade had already started. And oh my gosh, the kaleidoscope of colors, the monkey grinders, the sounds, the elephants, the animals, the clowns, all of it. It was so amazing. He'd never seen anything like this in his whole entire life. And so as the last clown went by, he reached down in his pocket, ran up to the clown, pulled his arm, and gave him the dollar bill. And lickety-split ran back home, happy as a lark. You see, he thought he had seen the circus, but he hadn't. He'd only seen the parade. Just around the corner was the circus. Can you imagine what his life would have been like if he'd have made it around that corner, if he'd have seen the real circus? Can you imagine what our folks can experience if we allow them the full exposure of the circus? If we allow ourselves the full exposure of the circus? Don't short-sight yourself by short-sighting your table, because you're either scared of someone being smarter than you are, or you're holding on so tight to your own ideas that you can't let go and let the circus happen. The final point that I'd give to you is that kindness is key. Nothing, nothing, nothing comes higher than kindness. We have irrational pastors, we have irrational musicians, we have irrational congregants. But we don't have to be irrational. We can go home and scream, shut the door, and put that person in a chair and just let it out. But what we show to our people is kindness and grace. That's what we've been asked to do. And what we really need to do is go home and pray for that person, no matter what. I have just talked and talked and talked, and I know it's 7 o'clock, and I haven't given you a chance to talk. But thank you so much for allowing me to come and just share my heart with you. I wish for you every ounce of the joy that I've experienced in ministry. And I wish for you every experience that I've had from one coast to the other in ministry. God has been so very good to me, and my life has been so blessed with the joy of serving Him. I wish that for you. Thank you.